Hello and welcome to the lecture where we're going to learn how to download some web content. So we've been building up to this. You understand what the try-catch is now, and we're ready to move forward. So let's go ahead and start a new project so that we'll have a space to play around with. And I'm just going to go ahead and call this project downloading. I better spell downloading correctly. Downloading web content. Okay, we'll go ahead and use defaults for everything here. And so like I said, the big thing is we want to be able to learn how to download some web content. So I have a browser here with a website. This happens to be mine. And on any website, it doesn't matter which one it is, and in most browsers, if you do a two-finger or a right-click, you can get to Inspect Element. I think it's easier to get to on Chrome. On Safari here, I think you have to enable something. Firefox, it should be easy too. But basically, there's this huge, all websites are made from this thing called HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but it's just this huge big chunk of text that's here. And so this is what we're going to try and download, or the HTML for some different websites. And then from there, we'll move forward with other things like how to access web services from like Google Maps, Facebook, Twitter, right? Like anything where we can connect with it. If it has an API, we'll dive into that later. That's sort of the big goal of what we've got going on here. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and move back to Android Studio here. Thank you for getting this project all up and running. So in order to download some information, we are going to do it in the background. And when I say the background, we're going to do it on a separate thread. And you're saying, well, what's a separate thread? I don't even know what these thread things are. Well, just think about when an app is running on an Android device, there's multiple threads going on, and the threads are where work happens. So there's something called the main thread, which is where if you don't specify otherwise, all your code runs, right? So when we had the app that, the egg timer, and it was keeping track and displaying the new timer, and it was checking in every 1,000 milliseconds, that was happening on the main thread. But if, for example, you want to go download something from the internet, like the HTML from this website, you should do that in the background. And the reason for that is if you go and try and get something from the internet on the main thread, you have to say, hey, website, what HTML do you have? And if it takes, 2 or 3 seconds to come back, if you're on the main thread, nothing can happen during that time, right? Like users can't click on buttons, they can't see animations happening, just everything shuts down. So threads are basically just where work happens in an app, and if you do things on a background thread, then you can come back with the results from that background thread, and in the main thread, update your UI with that. So that's what Google recommends, is that you do all your visual UI stuff on the main thread, and if you have to do any big intensive data stuff, and that includes web requests, that those happen on a background thread. Okay, so hopefully you're not too confused with that. Plenty of great content out there if you want to learn more, but let me keep walking you through this. So we are going to now create a class, and don't worry too much about this class. You can almost think to it as just a collection of variables and methods, but we're going to create a new class in order to download some stuff from the internet. So just kind of follow with me here for a second. We're going to say public class, and we're now going to create a name for this class, and we're going to call it download task. Now, there's nothing special about this name, but I just think it's appropriate because this class that we're creating, download task, extends something called async task. Now, this is something where you want to make sure you get the correct one and hit enter on there so you get everything imported. And then we're also, inside of our angled brackets, going to say string, comma, void, comma, string. Okay, and once we've got that in place, we want to do our curly brackets, but that's it. Okay, so this download class, or this download task, it basically extends, it borrows from this existing class called async task, and Google has written a ton of code to allow us to run things in the background quickly. So now anything that happens with this download task can happen in the background, okay? So you see we've got an error here. If we hover over it with this red light bulb, we want to implement the methods that it suggests, this do in background. So this is the code that we can have run in the background. Now, if you're wondering about what the string void string is, well, this is talking about what things we can pass into this download task, and how it's going to handle it, what it's going to pass back. And basically, there's an opportunity here with this void thing in the middle with some functionality, but by saying void, we're kind of just excluding that for now. But the string here on the beginning and the end, this is saying, hey, we can pass in a string and we can pass out a string. So the basic idea here would be we would pass in a URL, and then we would get back the HTML for that, right, as a string. That's sort of, we'd put that into the download task and we'd get that back out of it, okay? So you also might be wondering with this protected string do in background, like what's going on here? Well, protected is pretty similar to public. The basic idea with protected is that it's available throughout this whole package. So essentially your whole app, you can get access to this. So this is very important. If you're doing things on the background, you want other classes to be able to work with it. So that's why this protected is important. And then we've got this string ... strings. And you might be wondering what this is. And this is a way to essentially create an array. It's not technically an array. If you want to learn more about it, you can go look at argvars on the internet about this, but it's basically a way to add in as many strings as you'd like and then work with them if you want to. As far as accessing information from here, it's basically like working with an array. So the idea with this is, let's go ahead and do this in the onCreate. I want to show you an example of how this might work. So let's make a new download task object here. We're going to say download task and call this task. And we're going to say this is equal to a new download task. And with this, we'll just go ahead and put our semicolon. And then with our object task, we want to go ahead and go with this and run some code. So we are going to say task.execute. Okay, and this is where we're going to pass it some information. So for example, we are going to pass it a string, and this should be the URL of what we want to go grab. So I'm going to copy that URL, come back and paste it there. Okay, and let's go ahead and do our semicolon here. So this will then come through here into this method, this do in background. And then if we want to get some information back out of here, well, we would need to return it here. So we would maybe return something like done to say that, we were able to successfully process some information. Now, to kind of just confirm that this works, and I'm going to go ahead and get the emulator rocking and rolling here because it might take a second to fire up. But if we want to display some information and confirm that we were able to get this string to come out here, we would probably want to do a log. So let's go ahead and say log.i. And we're just going to simply display what the URL is. So we're going to say URL, comma, and then we want to provide what the URL was. So we're going to say strings, square brackets, 0. So again, this string ellipses here, essentially think of this as a string array. And when we say string 0, we're saying we want to know the very first item there. And if you're wondering, like, well, what other, can we pass multiple things in there? Yes, we can. So the idea with this is that we could essentially say, okay, there's one URL. Maybe we'll pass another URL of like google.com. Maybe we'll pass another URL of Stack Overflow.com. I mean, we can just keep adding as many strings as we want. And if we, pass through here, strings would contain 3 different things. But if we, only limit it to this zappycode.com string, then there's only one item in there, and we can get to that by passing in a 0 index. So that's basically what's going on there. Now, before we go ahead and move forward, remember when we learned about the try catch? Well, we have to be able to put a try catch around this execute because we don't know for sure whether it's going to work out, right? All sorts of situations about maybe you'll just never hear back from the server where you request this website. Maybe you're going to have the issue that the user's internet's not connected. There's all sorts of different things that could happen here. So what we want to do is we want to wrap this up inside of a try. So we're going to go ahead and put a try there. Okay, and then let's go ahead and add a catch as well. And we're going to say we are looking for just a general exception. And typically we call that E, doesn't have to be, but I think that's probably a good name for it. And if we do get an exception, let's go ahead and log that. So we'll say log.i, and we'll say exception, and then we'll go ahead and provide the actual exception there. So we'll just go ahead and say E, and maybe we'll say .print stack trace, and that's going to give us some more. Oh, well, that doesn't give us. Let's see if we can do a .toString. No. All right. Well, maybe what we'll do then instead is if we just do E.print stack trace, this essentially prints out and logs whatever error there is. So this is probably the better way to work with this. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this again. All we're hoping to see is that we can see what the URL is, and then it's going to try and execute this. And if there's an issue, we're going to get, see the stack trace here. But if not, it should just run just fine. Okay, so we'll go ahead and fire this up, and we'll wait for this to open. Okay, here comes the app, and let's go ahead and scroll through here, see if we got that URL showing up anywhere. I don't see it right now. I also don't see the exception, so I'm wondering whether this got run. Let's go ahead and try that one more time, because we should have URL being logged right there. Let's try this one more time. And again, we come down. I'm not seeing. Oh, there it is. It was right in front of my face. URL zappycode.com. Okay, so we successfully know that code is being run. But you might be saying, well, where did we get this done information? Well, what we can do is we can actually take the information from here and put it into a variable. So let's make a new string, and we'll call this result, kind of saying this is what we are getting back from the URL, and we'll say result is equal to this. Oh, excuse me, I accidentally deleted task. So result is equal to the task.execute. And the issue that we're running into here is we have to add a .get at the end. This goes ahead and grabs whatever it is, the string that we're going to be returning here, which in this case is the done. So let's go ahead, and once we get that result back, we'll go ahead and log this out. So we'll just go ahead and say log.i, and we'll say result, and we'll go ahead and pass in whatever the result is. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Oh, it's not liking what I have here. Let's see. Result might not have been initialized. We have to set it equal to something initially. So let's go ahead and set it equal to null. That way we know if we don't get something back, right, if there's an error and the exception and the stack trace comes, right, then we will know about that, because it will say result null. But let's go ahead and run this now. Okay, look at that. We are so much happier now this time. And here it comes. Oh, so we got to go back to logcat over here, but we can see we got the URL to print out there just like we did before, and then we also got result done printed out. So this kind of just proves that we were able to run some code in the background. Now, it was very simple code, right? We didn't download anything from the internet. We literally just passed a string here into this function. We printed out that string essentially with this log, and we returned back none, which we put in this result, and then we logged out result. That's all we really did. So let's go ahead and take things a step further. Let's make it so we can actually go reach out on the internet, try and grab the contents of whatever URL we pass through here, and then get it to show back. So in order to do this, let's go ahead and do a little work on this do in background method. And here's what we want to do. So we're no longer logging out information. We're going to say that we're done with that. But we do want to do here is we want to start setting up some things. So eventually at some point we want to return a result. So we're going to make a string that we're going to call result, and initially we'll just set this thing equal to an empty string. Okay. Other things that we need is we need to get an actual URL object. So I've referred to URL a few times, but I mean really what we have is a string that is a URL, but like in Java there's an actual URL object where you need to convert a string into a URL object, and I'll show you how to do that conversion. So we're going to create a variable called URL, lowercase there, and then we need something called an HTTP URL connection. There we go, just like that. And then what we're going to do is say the name of this is URL connection. Excellent. And we will set this equal to null for the time being. So think of HTTP URL connection as a way to, it's like a browser, just like we have Safari here where we give it a URL and it goes and shows us the information. An HTTP URL connection does the same thing, and we can go grab the HTML back from that. The big difference is that a browser can turn it into this cool looking thing, whereas in our app, we're just going to simply get the text from there. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to try to convert the URL that comes through here into a actual URL object. So to just make this a little bit easier, right now the name for this parameter is strings. Let's go ahead and call it URLs because it's possible that multiple would come through here. And what we want to do is we're going to make a new URL object. Okay, and inside of here we're going to pass the first item in the URL's quote-unquote array. I know it's not an actual array, but that'll go ahead and grab that, and let's put it inside of our URL object. So we're going to say, okay, URL is equal to this, and you'll notice we get an error here, and that's because this might not work out. Not all strings can be turned into a URL. So for example, if I forget the HTTP and the www and I just pass this, this would not successfully pass. And same as if I just if this was just the number 4, that wouldn't turn into a URL. It's not valid. And so if it doesn't work, there would be an exception and we have to handle that. So it's kind of cool. We can go ahead and just click on this surround with try catch, and it actually handles all of this for us. So I think this looks pretty good. I would maybe just change this to a general exception because I just want to say, hey, whatever exception comes our way, just go ahead and print that out. We don't need to get too specific there. Okay. So we've converted our string into a URL. The next thing that we want to do is we want to create a URL connection. So remember, we had provided this name here, but we actually want to make a URL connection now. So we're going to say we want to have our URL.open connection. Okay. And we have to specify the type that this is going to be, and we say, hey, this is going to be an HTTP URL connection. Just kind of cast that as we go through. Then we need to create something called an input stream. So the input stream is just going to be able to gather the data as it's coming through, as it's hitting that URL. So we're going to say input stream. Okay, and we'll call that in. This is going to be equal to our URL connection dot get input stream. And connected with that, not only do we have to have an input stream, but we need to have an input stream reader. So this is going to be able to actually read the data. We'll just call that one reader simply, and we'll say this is a new input stream reader, and we have to pass in our input stream in here in order to create that. After that, we want to actually go ahead and read some data from there. So we're going to say reader.read, and you can see this gives us back an int, which is a little bit curious. You might be saying, hey, how is this going to work? But this is its way of giving us each individual character. In fact, when we go through this input stream, we have to go character by character to get our information. So we'll just call this data. We're going to make a new int called data, and it's going to be equal to whatever we just read. That sort of gets the very first piece of data that comes through. And this is where we get a little bit tricky, is we're going to create a while loop where we say, okay, while data is not equal to -1, we'll do our curly brackets here, we want to run some code. And basically what we're doing here is we are going to want to say data is equal to reader.read, and read basically moves on to the next item. And it basically, data could be equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up, and the way that it converts it back to a string, you'll see here in a second. But if it's ever equal to -1, that's the reader's way of saying, hey, we're done, we got to the last thing. So that's why this keeps running until data is equal to -1, at which point it will not go through the while loop anymore. So we got to turn this data into a character. So we're going to say char current is equal to the data, and we need to cast this through that it is coming through as a char, just like that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say result. Remember, this is our string that we had up there. We're going to say result plus equals current. So that just adds a character onto it. So it's just letter by letter. For example, if we go to here on ZappyCode, like it's going to do this angled bracket, then an exclamation point, then a capital D, then a capital O, then a capital C, and just letter by letter, character by character, it's going to add it onto this result string, and this reader.read that sort of moves on to the next one. So after this while loop is done running, we are going to go ahead and return the result. So we'll go ahead and type that out, and that's it. So this is going to go do all of our information for us, hopefully go get to the URL successfully. The one thing we do want to fix is right now we're returning done. We either want to return the HTML or we want to return something that says like, hey, this didn't go right. So we're actually going to get rid of this return, and we're going to put a return inside of this catch. So after we've printed out a stack trace, we're going to say return failed, just like this, and this is basically our way of saying, hey, something didn't go right, you've got to figure that out. So we currently have the code to take whatever it spits back to us and log that out, which means we're at a good place. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. Oh, and I just thought of something that we're going to get an error with, but maybe it will be good to see the error, and then we can go ahead and roll through there. Okay, app opened up. And okay, I think this is the big issue. Yeah, and this is what it is. Permission denied, missing internet permission. So on Android, if someone's app, if a user downloads an app and that app wants to connect the internet, their GPS, whatever it is, you've probably seen this before, it has to ask permission from the user to say, hey, is it okay if I go do this? So we have to, state that we want that permission from the user. So if we open up our project structure here and we go to the Android manifest, we can go ahead and add this permission. So above application but below manifest here, we are going to ask for a use permission, and there's all sorts of different ones here, but we want the one for the internet. So there's a whole lot. If you scroll down though, you can find the one that just says android.permission.internet, and then we have to make an ending tag for that. But this basically, when the app opens up, especially if you push this to the Google Play Store, it's going to say, hey, can this app use the internet? And at that point, the user would have to say yes if they wanted that to go through. But let's go ahead and run this. That should fix our issue that we had. Okay. And, I should get Logcat up and running here so we can see what we get. And see, the app is opening up here, and so far nothing here. I guess it's taken a long time to go grab this information, and look at this. So here you see this big chunk of text, this doc type HTML head meta going and doing all this stuff. It eventually went out and got all this information, and it printed it out into the result here. Okay, and whoa, you can see it is really long at some point. So that means it worked. So I hope you enjoyed learning about that. We took our try-catch that we kind of learned in a theoretical sense and then actually applied it to a real situation where, hey, there could be a whole lot of things that go wrong in this situation, but we made it all work and we're able to successfully print out some HTML. Now there's all other sorts of things that we can do, much more advanced than what we just covered. I know things got a little intense here with some of this reader stuff, but there's even better ways that we can handle this, and we'll talk about that in the future. But the next thing that we want to talk about is how we can actually go download images from the internet. So bit by bit, you're going to keep learning these skills about working with downloading data. It's going to be great.